It's officially the offseason, and the Seahawks are pretty tight up against the salary cap heading towards 2025. How can they create some cap relief? We're going to be taking a first look at 6 to 8 candidates for cap casualties for the Seahawks heading into this offseason on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And as always, a special thanks to all the 12s, whether you're tuning in from Forks, Washington, or Goodyear, Arizona. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are drawing closer and closer to the start of the new league year. It might seem like it's still so far away, but it's now less than 2 months away. We're going to be taking a look at some cap casualty candidates. We've got report cards at the cornerback position and some Emerald City pairs, which free agents could pair with the prospective coordinator candidates the Seahawks have been linked to. All of that coming up on a jam-packed Wednesday episode, courtesy of FanDuel. Make the NFL playoffs even more exciting with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When you enter the offseason, there's always a sense of hope, or at least 99% of the time, a sense of hope for improving a roster with free agency and the draft just around the corner. But just like with the coaches market, when there's Black Monday, there's plenty of black days in the offseason for NFL players who have big bloated contracts or maybe at the end of their contract, and they could become cap casualties. And when you look at the Seahawks' current situation with all the incentives that were earned from players like Geno Smith, Laken Tomlinson, performance escalators for players like Abraham Lucas, Riq Woolen, the Seahawks are way below the salary cap line, and they are going to have to make some moves in order to give themselves the opportunity to improve their roster. There may need to be some subtraction to create some additions, so to speak, Rob. And I guess you could say, luckily for John Schneider, there are a number of moves that can be made. And I think we got to start with the elephant in the room here, and that is quarterback Geno Smith, because he's got a $44.5 million cap hit now, with those $6 million in escalators that he just earned in that season finale against the Rams. That's still a fairly affordable starting quarterback, but it's much more expensive than $38 million, which he was originally scheduled to make. And with his future potentially in question, and the fact you can make $31 million by cutting or trading him, this is obviously not going to be a storyline that's going away anytime soon.
No, it certainly is not. And as you said, Corbin, the Seahawks currently are way over the cap. In some estimates, and there's a lot out there, but a lot of them have Seattle currently estimated to be $30+ million over the cap. So would you consider that Geno Smith, just by cutting or releasing or trading him, might give the Seahawks roughly $31 million in flexibility? Then sure. That's just going to lead to that much more speculation that, hey, just cut the quarterback and problem solved. Obviously, if you don't have a quality quarterback to replace Geno Smith, then it doesn't matter what your salary cap is. You're not going to have any success. So I do think that is a topic that is something that Seattle is going to have to consider. Obviously, you got to get better play at the quarterback position if you are going to find yourself in a better position when it comes to the postseason. I think it's going to be more complicated than just releasing your starting quarterback, however. So, look, as you said, Corbin, $44.5 million. That's 16% of the team's overall salary cap going to just one player. I mean, it just seems like basically we're repeating what has happened in the past. I mean, there was all the talk about, the Seahawks needed to do something with Russell Wilson because they didn't want that much of their salary cap dedicated to any one player. So you find yourself in a very similar position now as where the Seahawks were a few years ago. And so that's one of the things that's going to drive that debate. Geno Smith is going to create a whole bunch of attention. And yesterday I talked about another player who, because of his bloated salary, because of the diminished production, that I think Tyler Lockett is another player that we have to put on this list. Look, he is going to be due $30.895 million. That's 11.2% of his salary, of the Seahawks salary cap as well, considering the fact that Tyler Lockett caught just 2 touchdown receptions a year ago, that like Geno Smith, he is also an aging player, that any type of a release or trade would free up significant money, $17 million be freed up here with Tyler Lockett. And I think that he also is a player that we have to consider. And for me, the most likely candidate, however, is Dre'Mont Jones, because again, he has not been very productive. He is due $25.645 million. That is 9.33% of the salary cap. And he's got an interesting one. If he is released or traded prior to June 1st, then Seattle would still have to eat $14 million, but he would be at $11 million of savings here for Seattle. And considering the fact that Seattle has an awful lot of young, talented players at that rush outside linebacker position, then I think that Dre'Mont Jones is much more likely to have played his last game with the Seahawks than either Geno Smith or Tyler Lockett for that matter.
And we've talked about this some leading up to this point. We mentioned extension candidates on Monday's episode. Geno Smith, you can lower that salary cap hit by extending him. Now, there's going to be some fans that say, but he's going to be 35. We don't want to extend the contract. These are all discussions the Seahawks are going to have here in coming weeks if they're not already discussing these things behind the scenes. Offensive coordinator is obviously the biggest thing they're working on right now, but I guarantee the front office is looking into these contract situations already. Tyler Lockett, maybe there's a pathway to getting him back in Seattle, but it isn't going to be under this current contract. And there's going to be interest. There will be other teams that are interested in Tyler Lockett, because I think even with the numbers this year, there will be other teams that think, hey, I can still squeeze out another good year or two out of him in my offense. And he's a great locker room guy as well. And Dre'Mont Jones, look, he's had some moments. I thought this was his best season in Seattle of the two, but he's just still got too many games that he goes ghost mode. And you're looking for him to make the impact that you are paying for, and it just hasn't happened. He seems to me like the most likely, just as you think, that he's going to be out the door because of that cap hit and the fact that, yeah, they got to eat some dead money, but you're still saving $11.5 million against the cap. As far as other candidates here, DK Metcalf, to me, cutting DK Metcalf is off the table. I think that the two options you have are either trading him if you can get a good return, or you try to figure out how you can work an extension. I think it's worth it to Seattle to have him on the roster with his talent and remaining upside instead of just cutting him loose and not getting anything in return. And he's got a big dead cap hit. You're going to save $10 million, but at that point, is it worth it for a player that's still in the prime of his career compared to Tyler Lockett, who is now in the twilight of his career? It's two different circumstances. So I would be stunned if Seattle goes that route. I think an extension, letting him play out this year, or trading him would be the three options that are on the table. Two other names worth noting here, Noah Fant and Uchenna Nwosu. Nwosu's is an interesting one because of the injuries that he's had, but he's so popular in the locker room, and we saw how well he played late this season when he finally was healthy. I still think he is an incredible player when he is healthy on the field. He's had some bad luck injuries more than anything, and you're only going to save $8 million against the cap if you cut him. To me, it's kind of like DK Metcalf. It's not worth it to me because I still think that this is a guy with what he brings to the locker room as a veteran presence. He can defend the run. He can rush the passer. I think he is a player that it makes sense to keep around. On the flip side, Noah Fant, there's been some good moments, but he's another guy that has not lived up to the contract. And $8.9 million to cut him to save against the cap, that seems to me like that would be in the Dre'Mont Jones category, where you probably have to strongly consider making that move to open up cap space.
Yeah, and again, every time that you make some type of a move, when we're talking about cutting or trading away a quality veteran, a starting caliber player like Noah Fant, then I think that you have to look to the draft and look to your current team. I think the fact that the Seahawks have got to feel pretty good about the young tight end that they drafted this past season, A.J. Barner, who we've talked about before, really was one of the bright spots of the rookie class. The fact that this is another exceptional year at the tight end position in terms of draft, then again, I think it's a player in Noah Fant that you could be able to replace at least a little bit easier than some of the other players that we mentioned. When you first mentioned Fant, I actually thought of another Fant, George Fant, that of course was signed by Seattle. He returned to the Seahawks as a veteran offensive lineman, and of course went down with injury early this past season, and so wasn't able to give Seattle much for their investment. He is due $5.37 million next year. So it's relative peanuts when we're compared to everybody else that we're talking about here. But at the same time, if the Seahawks were to release him, they would save $3.8 million, not nothing. And again, the fact that Seattle has presumably a healthy Abe Lucas returning, you made the investment in Mike Jarrell. We saw some flashes of his upside. Stone Forsythe, while I do not anticipate that he necessarily is going to be a high priority for Seattle to retain. He's going to be a free agent himself, but still, Seattle does have some bodies that outside that offensive tackle position, So I think that George Fant, along with Noah Fant, might be some players who are very much on edge during this time of year.
And two other players we can mention that are kind of in that mid-level that you could save cap room. Roy Robertson Harris, $6.6 million if you cut him. There's no guaranteed money that they have to pay left in his deal. That probably was a rental by trading for him. I would anticipate that he's probably going to be somebody that gets cut. And Rayshawn Jenkins has 1 year left on the 2-year deal. He signed. Kobe Bryant emerged as a really good starter. You can save $5.2 million by cutting Rayshawn Jenkins. So I think that's another one that could very much be on the table as John Schneider in the front office try to figure out how to create some cap space for this upcoming free agency period in the 2025 season. When we come back, we're going to continue our end of season grade cards. We had quarterback yesterday. We're going to do cornerback today. Devon Witherspoon and company. Don't go away. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can get bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Bet on everything from Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen combining for 6 or more touchdowns this weekend to Jahmyr Gibbs producing 115 total yards from scrimmage in NFL divisional round play. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Time to continue our postseason report cards. Yesterday, we handed out grades for the quarterback position. We're going to go to the cornerback position today on the defensive side of the football. And once again, extremely high expectations for this group coming into the year with Devon Witherspoon, Riq Woolen, a healthy Trey Brown set to start. There were some questions behind those guys, especially after Mike Jackson was traded during training camp to the Panthers. But nonetheless, this was expected to be one of the strengths of Seattle's football team. And I think when you look at the raw stats, that's not necessarily suggested with those numbers that this was one of the more dominant groups on Seattle's defense. And yet, in the last 7 games when this defense was playing their best football, aside from the Green Bay game and the last game against the Rams, where there were some dudes that were out of the lineup and that impacted numbers, but really cut down in the number of explosives. And it felt like this cornerback group started to play to the expectations that they had set for themselves before the season. And there was also an unsung hero that was part of that equation as well to get this group playing their best football the last couple months.
Yeah, and obviously, anybody who watched the Seahawks over the last couple of months of football knows that unsung hero, of course, was Josh Jobe. But I think that he's a perfect player to kind of start off this conversation with. I gave him an A-, which, sorry to ruin any anticipation that we might have been building up, but that A- that I personally am giving Josh Jobe is the same A- that I wound up giving Devon Witherspoon. And I think a lot of that has to do with expectation. I know Devon Witherspoon is an absolutely terrific player, of course. In his second year, is voted to the Pro Bowl. Just an unbelievable player, the versatility that he showed. But Josh Jobe, to me, because there were such low expectations, because he played as brilliantly as he did, he had an interception. Devon Witherspoon, of course, wound up with 0 interceptions this season. That's the biggest reason why I gave him an A- rather than an A. But again, when it comes to Josh Jobe, I just see the size, the physicality, just the consistency, the reliability, not only on the football field when it comes to being, during the game itself, but the accountability with which he practiced. I thought that was something that Mike McDonald kind of talked about that. And I think you could take something away from all of the effusive praise that Mike McDonald gave Josh Jobe and some of the kind of the side eye and speaking out of the corner of your mouth kind of comments with some of Seattle's other defensive players that, again, I think just illustrates that much more why Josh Jobe was, even bigger than the sum of his parts in some ways. So again, for me, Devon Witherspoon, A-, Josh Jobe, an A-. To Riq Woolen, I gave him a B+. I think, again, the expectations was higher. And so I was hoping that he would take his game to another level. I thought that he was a more consistent all-around open field tackler this season, but there definitely were some games where he would lose track of the football. He would grab a jersey. But still, he led the team with 14 passes broken up. He tied for the team lead with 3 interceptions. That led all of the corners. And so I gave him a B+. And then, unfortunately, we're starting to talk about some of the players that didn't live up to expectations. Tre Brown being a former top 100 selection to wind up getting, basically being benched for much of the season, being torched when he was on the field, went from starting 7 games a year ago with 6 passes broken up to only starting 3 games this past season, and had 1 pass breakup. I mean, he gave up more touchdowns, 3 to 4 times as many touchdowns as he broke up passes. So again, that pretty disturbing trend for big play Tre Brown. Unfortunately, too many of those big plays were for the opponents, and that's why I think now, with Tre Brown entering his free agent time, I think that we've seen the last number 22 for the Seahawks.
Yeah, to me, this was a group that kind of functioned like a bell curve because I thought that Devon Witherspoon, I don't care that he didn't have an interception. The game-changing plays were still there. The guy had almost 100 tackles. He lives in the backfield. I don't care if he had only 1 sack. He consistently created pressure as a blitzer, had a bunch of pass breakups in coverage. He can go against tight ends. He can go against speedy slots. He can go against big receivers on the outside. You can move him all over the place. He had a great season. So I'm giving him an A- as well. Josh Jobe, I'm giving an A because the expectations aspect. I mean, he just came in and played really good football and made it that Tre Brown had absolutely no chance to get back in the starting lineup until, unfortunately, he missed the season finale with an injury. But Joe played really well. Riq Woolen, I'm going to give a B- just because it felt like, look, second straight year that he lost his starting job for 1 game, was benched for a game. There's still some maturity things that need to be sorted out. And there were too many big plays that were given up by him this year. I believe he gave up 5 touchdowns in coverage this year. You've got to be better with the talent that he has, and we haven't seen that leap yet. I'm giving Tre Brown a D because he gave up 3 touchdowns in the first couple of weeks that he played. That's why Josh Jobe took over and never looked back. And Nehemiah Pritchett had a pretty rough rookie season when he had his opportunities, a 33% missed tackle rate when he played on defense, and also gave up some big plays, 15 yards per reception in coverage. Artie Burns wasn't healthy when he was. He played well. So Artie Burns is going to get a C. I wish we could have seen a little bit more of him because he's played well every time he's had a chance to play. He just cannot avoid the injury bug. So with all those mashed together and with the numbers, again, Riq Woolen's got some really good numbers in terms of 3 interceptions and 11 pass breakups. There's a lot to like, but there were also a lot of plays that it felt like could have been made out there that weren't too many big plays for the other team for me to go bigger than a B-. That's the grade I'm giving the cornerback group as a whole. I felt like this group, when you put the entire group together, that they were better than average, but they weren't great or exceptional by any means either.
Yeah, I wound up giving the group as a whole a B, and we had very similar grades. Nehemiah Pritchett, I gave him a C. Artie Burns, I gave him a B minus. And as you said, I mean, made lots of plays when he was on the field. 3 pass breakups in 4 games for the Seahawks. So again, I gave the cornerback room a B as in boy overall. That is the highest positional grade that I am going to give any group for the Seahawks, offense, defense, or special teams for that matter. I thought that this was a group that was, again, the best for the Seahawks. It just still wasn't exceptional. And again, it's one of the reasons why the Seahawks are sitting out the postseason.
When we come back, we are going to shift gears to Emerald City pairs. And this is something we did last year when the Seahawks were trying to hire offensive and defensive coordinators. They're trying to hire an offensive coordinator again. Which free agents from the candidates that have been linked to the Seahawks could potentially come as a tandem to the Pacific Northwest? We'll get to that coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're tasked with hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team, and they make the process faster, and it's free. When I was a site manager previously for Seahawks on SI, and I'm currently in that position once again, LinkedIn Jobs has always been my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates. They've made the process easy and seamless. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. And it's so easy that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources necessary to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier, and they even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even quicker. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to the 12s out there. As always, thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks continuing to cast a wide net for their offensive coordinator vacancy that's been open since they fired Ryan Grubb the day after the season finale. To this point, we know of 3 interviews that have happened. We'll see if Grant Udinski, the assistant offensive coordinator of the Vikings, has an interview in the next few days with the Seahawks. To this point, all we know is there's been a request put in to interview him. But 4 candidates that have been linked to the Seahawks. My understanding, there's a few others that have not been reported yet. We'll see if that information starts to come out. Seattle is getting that wide net going to make sure they have an open mind and make sure they hit on this coordinator position. But with those 4 coaches that have been linked to the team already, 3 of them interviewing, 1 of them with a request, it's time for Emerald City pairs. And this is something we busted out last year, and we enjoy doing this because, quite frankly, a lot of times when teams hire new coaches, those new coaches bring at least 1 person with them in free agency to help adapt to their scheme. And I do think there are some really intriguing names for all 4 of these teams where these potential coordinators are coming from. And we've got to start with Grant Udinski for the Minnesota Vikings because you're talking about a team that went 14-3 this year in the regular season. Obviously, they lost their playoff wildcard game to the Rams in Arizona, but they've got a lot of really good players that are scheduled to become free agents, including on the offensive side of the football. Sam Darnold is the name that's going to get the most attention, but I think Dalton Reisner is a guy who teams have just kind of slept on the last couple of years. He's had to wait late in the process to get a new contract. If you bring in Dalton Reisner with Grant Udinski, if you pair those 2 together, I think Reisner comes in and he's immediately going to bring stability to the interior of the line that this team just has not had. Maybe not the most physical presence, but he's a good pass protector. He's very smart, and I think he would be a good resource for those young guys that would be around him at the left tackle and center positions. I think that it would make a lot of sense, and it wouldn't be a break the bank type deal either. 1-year contract that would be affordable, and I think you could get an upgrade over what they had from Laken Tomlinson last year. Or on the right side even, Reisner's played both guard positions during his time in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And that's one of the things that is intriguing about Reisner is that he has played both the left and right guard positions. This is a quality veteran starter. Played obviously with Minnesota this past year, but then previously with the Denver Broncos. And so very different offensive schemes, and yet still been very successful. I think that he's better in pass protection than he is as a run blocker. And so that's one of the reasons why I kind of struggle in some ways to see this pairing. However, if Udinski is hired as Seattle's offensive coordinator and he likes Dalton Reisner, then I think that move makes an awful lot of sense, just because we all know that Seattle struggled horrifically up front in protection, as well as in the running game. And as you said, I mean, sure, everybody is going to focus in on Sam Darnold, and for good reason. But at the same time, I also think that it's much more likely that whoever Seattle brings as offensive coordinator is going to be pushing for some help along the offensive line rather than that, shooting for the moon, superstar quarterback with a contract likely to be over $40 million per year.
Let's shift gears now to Clint Kubiak. And listen, the New Orleans Saints, when they're healthy, they've got some quality offensive linemen on that football team. The problem is they were anything but healthy this year, and none of those big-name linemen are set to be free agents. So if you're looking for Clint Kubiak to bring offensive line help with him, that's probably not going to be in the cards. However, we mentioned this early in the show, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this too. But Noah Fant, if you cut Noah Fant or you trade Noah Fant, I think you would probably have to cut him with his contract. But you can save $8.9 million against the salary cap there. That's a big chunk of money that you can save moving on from Noah Fant. Juwan Johnson has been one of the best red zone tight ends in the NFL the last 4 years. He has had, I believe he's had 11 touchdowns during that time in the red zone. It's tied for the 6th most among tight ends during that span. So he might not be Travis Kelce or George Kittle, but he has been in that next tier. He has been really reliable in the red zone, a former receiver converted to tight end that fits the mold of how you're going to be able to use him, similar to Noah Fant. And I don't think you're going to have to pay him the contract that you are paying Noah Fant right now. Maybe not too much savings, but Clint Kubiak proved last year he got the ball to this kid, 50 catches, over 530 yards, 11 yards per reception, 3 touchdowns. This is a player that I think maybe for a little less money, you're going to get more production from him, especially if Clint Kubiak is your offensive coordinator and he knows how to get the ball to this kid in the red zone. Juwan Johnson, to me, would make a lot of sense as somebody that you're not breaking the bank for, but you might be able to get more bang for your buck, so to speak, with him and Clint Kubiak as a pair.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think that Juwan Johnson is a very similar player as Noah Fant. As you said, former wide receiver, as was Noah Fant, a guy that can run like the wind, at least in comparison to most other tight ends that are out there. And he has shown some savvy when it comes to the red zone and as far as getting those first downs. So to me, it's an interesting option. Now, I think that the Seahawks would have to do something with Noah Fant to make this move make some sense, frankly. But at the same time, if the Seahawks were to do so, then I really do believe that Juwan Johnson would have had much better numbers if the Saints had any type of consistency and health at the quarterback position. And that would be the only other player that I would mention here. The Saints showed some flashes a year ago with the rookie quarterback, Spencer Rattler, coming in with their star quarterback, Derek Carr, nursing yet another injury. I mentioned Derek Carr because, again, if the Seahawks are going to just completely shoot for the moon, then Derek Carr is another veteran quarterback out there that might be available and move sometime during this offseason. Now, his current contract is staggering. It's $51.5 million next year, $61.5 2 years from now. Like Geno Smith, he's going to be 35 years old. That's big dollars. But still, Derek Carr is yet another very talented quarterback that theoretically could be available, and no one is going to know him better at this point than Clint Kubiak.
When you look at the Chicago Bears, obviously the season ended. They did win their last game, but they had a 10-game losing streak before that point. They struggled to win football games. And typically teams like that, you're not jumping trying to sign players off of that roster. But this is a team that did have talent, and they started the year off well before things just kind of unraveled. And if you look, a lot of people mention the offensive line as a weakness for the Chicago Bears. There were certainly some positions on that offensive line that they had major issues, but Tevin Jenkins, who was formerly a second-round pick out of Oklahoma State, His biggest issue has been health. He missed a ton of games his first couple of years. He's missed at least 3 games due to injury in all 4 of his NFL seasons. So the durability factor, I think that is going to scare some teams, and I think it's going to lower how much he's going to get in the open market. But he's been really good the last couple of years, in particular when he's been healthy, and he moved from tackle to guard inside. He's a really athletic guard. He's got length. He's got size, 6'6", 321. I mean, this is a big, long guy with athleticism who only gave up 18 pressures this entire season in 14 starts. Tevin Jenkins is a player that could make some sense if you're looking for a buy low, still has really high upside, could be a foundational piece that you get at a lower starting price. I think that he's a player well worth that risk, especially because the fact that I believe he's only going to be 27 next season. You're talking about a guy that still is a very young player that has had some good tape the last couple of years.
He has had good tape. And as you said, he struggled with durability, but he has the size. He has production against legitimate NFL talent. You consider the pass rushers that are playing in the NFC North Division, and he's played pretty well. And I think that some of the pressures and sacks that he and the rest of the Bears front allowed this past season, frankly, goes a lot on the quarterback, Caleb Williams. I mean, he was sacked more than any other quarterback in all of the NFL. And similar to when Seattle had Russell Wilson, basically sometimes the quarterback runs himself into sacks. I think that Tevin Jenkins and the rest of that Chicago Bears offensive line really kind of took it on the chin a little bit statistically because their quarterback made life difficult for them. So I would actually throw in the center, Colin Shelton, is another one. He had previously been with the LA Rams at the University of Washington. At 6'5", 310 pounds, he has the size to potentially play guard, although I like him best as a center. So again, a couple of offensive linemen there that I think would make a lot of sense if the Seahawks were to bring in the Thomas Brown as their offensive coordinator. And then finally, I would mention Keenan Allen, the wide receiver. If Seattle decides to change up their wide receiver room, as we talked about, with possibility DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett maybe no longer being in Seattle. Look, Keenan Allen is well past his prime, but he still, for my money, is one of the best slot receivers in the league. I've often compared Jackson Smith and Jigba to Keenan Allen. I think that he could learn from one of the great receivers of this era and make himself that much more of a superstar with working under his guidance.
And last but not least, let's go to the big man, the bouncer in Lions clothes himself, Hank Fraley. And when you bring in an offensive line coach, you want to bring in an offensive lineman. And it's a different dynamic than what we just mentioned with the Bears, because Tevin Jenkins, again, you'd be given a short 1 to 2 year deal, but he could still potentially be a foundational piece if he's able to stay healthy and he continues his ascent. That would not be the case with Kevin Zeitler, who is 35 years old, but he's playing as well as he has at any point in his career right now. He might have had the best season he's ever had this year. Now, he gave up 5 sacks, but only 18 pressures this season. He has been fantastic, and he is a mauler in the run game. If you are wanting to install that Lion-style tenacity, who better to teach the ropes to the rest of the offensive line than Kevin Zeitler? And this is a guy the last couple of years has been a free agent, and we've talked about Seattle going after him. But now you would have a coach that you could actually say, look, we know that you like playing on the eastern side, but come play for Hank Fraley. You love playing for me in Detroit. Come on out here. Let's get this run game rolling. Have his mentor presence to go with Abe Lucas and Oluwatimi. If you bring in another center, whatever ends up happening, Kevin Zeitler is as good of a right guard as there is in the National Football League, and I still think he's got some good football left in him, probably a year or two left to play at least, and he is playing at a very high level. That would be the one name that jumps out. Detroit actually does not have a lot of standout offensive players that are going to be heading to free agency. You could maybe bring in somebody like Dan Skipper as a bench player that can be that 6th offensive lineman, George Fant style. But if you're looking for a difference maker, at least in the short term, Kevin Zeitler is that guy. And some of the young guards like Satoa LeMay and Christian Haynes could learn a lot watching this guy, how he handles himself on the practice field and the game field.
Yeah, no question about that. He is pretty long in the tooth. He's going to be entering his 13th NFL season next year, but he has basically been a rock, over his first dozen seasons in the NFL. And obviously, the whole premise of this idea with the Emerald City pairs is the idea that if Hank Fraley is coming as Seattle's offensive coordinator, then he would be bringing in a player that he's familiar with. Well, it doesn't just have to be Hank Fraley who's familiar with him. Mike McDonald himself is familiar with Kevin Zeitler because, of course, Zeitler played a couple of seasons with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, obviously, McDonald was focused on defense, but still, that familiarity, the fact that Kevin Zeitler was very effective, his only Pro Bowl season was with the Baltimore Ravens, then to your point, he is playing some of his absolute best football right now. He's missed a total of 12 games in 12 NFL seasons, starting 181 of 182 games. So again, he's durable, he's consistent, he is reliable. He's basically the antithesis of what everything that the Seahawks offensive line has been over the last decade or so. So again, I think that Hank Fraley as offensive coordinator and certainly Kevin Zeitler as Seattle's new starting right guard would be a really interesting combination for an awful lot of Seahawks fans.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on tomorrow's show, season's over, so we don't have crossover Thursday. We're going to be taking a look at a few of these coordinator candidates with some insiders on tomorrow's show. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and thanks for tuning in. Go Hawks.